Alright, so this is what I ended up with after adding some of the extra details, and you'll notice I also have like a bunch of different colors. I'm gonna cover that in just a second, but before I get into the materials and what we're gonna be exporting for texturing and all of that, I just wanna show you a couple more things that again is more of the same, but that might give you some extra ideas. So here we have this extra bit, so I'm gonna get in. So this is the extra sort of dial that I created. I actually use exactly the same technique that I show you with this one. The big difference is that if I go in, the objects that I use in this one to add kind of like that grip, in this case they are subtracting. That's all. So if I go ahead and enable this as a union, you'll see it is the same thing. I just scale the same like the length of it, and then I just set it to subtract, and you get this really nice effect. And the tapering here, that's from the actual main object, the base. So I have this chamfer effect, right? So again, non-destructive, very nice and easy to use. So that's something I want to cover. Maybe this one as well. If I go in here, I use 3 objects for this. So I have a cube. So this is a cube that I use with like a squash cube that I use with rounded edges. That's basically it. And then I pushed it in. This is just a cylinder with chamfer, and the base is just a normal cylinder, and I duplicated that to get me these 2 dials. That's it. In terms of like the complexity of the other stuff that I added, I have the antenna, which is again a bunch of simple, objects. Let me just break it down for you. So I have, if I go in, I have a cylinder. That's the base. Then I have another cylinder that I add the 100% fillet, so you get, it's almost like a capsule really. But instead of using the capsule, which you could have done in this case, I like to use the cylinder just because it allows me to manipulate the amount of capsuleness, if you will, the amount of fillet that would have. So let me just undo that. That's the only reason I had that. Then I have another cylinder creating that sort of round edge in here, and there is a gap in here that is being created with a cube. Right? So again, non-destructive, we can adjust this at any time, come back and change it. And the same thing for the antenna. So the antenna is made out of a long tube or a long cylinder that I use a little bit of taper. Then I have this section right here, which is a duplicate, and I use a bit of chamfer to get that sort of, nice edge in here. Then I have the same capsule. Actually, this is not a capsule. This is a cube. So let me just bring that out. So it's a cube. That I use just the roundness just to make that sort of capsule effect, but it is a cube so that I can maintain that, sharp planes on each side. And that's it. Let's go ahead and get out of this. So you see, very simple things, and now that you have a good idea of how I like treat those complex objects with simple primitives, you can create pretty much anything that you want really. Now the other thing are these tubes that I created in here. And then we go into the grouping and the colors, just to have an idea of what we're going to be exporting. So in here, if I just go from the back, it's actually easier. We have like 4 tubes, but those ones are just cylinders. So there's nothing too crazy here. I just use the clay option instead of like the primitive, because I'm not gonna be changing this much. So it's just a tube, and I just placed it. The only different one is this one right here, and this is the only reason I want to show you this technique, because it is quite fun. So I'm going to create a new one just to show you how it is done, and then we come back to this. So if you create a new clay tool, it remember my previous setting, so that's what I was using. So a cylinder that I just stretched out. So let's go ahead and rotate that like so. And let's say that this is going to be another cable that we want to add somewhere. So I'm going to press spacebar. That obviously creates that clay. Again, is not a primitive for non-destructive workflow, it's just the clay. So I'm gonna press escape now, and we have our piece, right? So of course we can go ahead and scale it and that sort of thing, but we wanna get this sort of like nice cable effect, because right now it's more like a hard tube, right? So there's a fantastic tool here in Modeler, which is this one right here, the warp tool. So I'm gonna click on that one, and I'm gonna make sure that I have this one selected with this little highlight underneath, and you'll see we have like 3 options, right? And these are kind of like the shapes, or like the form of the tip of the brush that you can use to deform. So with this one selected, you'll see it's, as I hover over, it has this sort of like shape. If I click and drag, it sort of moves that. So this is something that is fantastic, especially when you're working on like VR, for example, in more organic stuff, because you can just start like pushing and pulling and distorting things quite easily. So that's quite nice. But the trick that I want to show you is that you can actually use this as a gizmo, or like you can switch between the brush, which is what I have selected, and gizmo. So if I press the letter G on my keyboard, it's going to bring the same tool, but you see it's not attached to my mouse anymore. It's actually a gizmo that I can adjust. And this will probably show you a little bit better what I wanna cover in this lesson, which is that you can change the size and see it in real time, but the hardness is that sort of like inside sphere. So if it is set to, let's set it to 100, when I move this, and the way that you move it, or the way that you apply this, is with the spacebar. So I can press the spacebar and I can move that. You see it is really, really strong. Let's go ahead and undo that. So if I reduce the hardness, it's kind of like, if you're familiar with ZBrush, it's like the focal shift, or it just makes it a little bit softer. So I'm gonna press spacebar again, and then move it around, and you see we have like a nice soft version of it. Now that's not even half of the trick. The real cool thing that you can do about it, let's actually scale this up a little bit, and it has to do with that sort of like more flowy shape that I have here on the cable. Let's actually do it from the other side. Let's actually hold the shift key while we rotate around so that we can do it from the front view. And here we go. So if I press the spacebar, I can start affecting this tube. So I can push this down, and I haven't let go of my spacebar, right? And I'm gonna let go of my click in my mouse, but I'm still holding the spacebar. So that means that the effect, I haven't finished with the effect, right? I'm still pressing spacebar. I can just go ahead and keep reposition this like so. So the effect, as you can see, is still happening. But what's really cool is that as I press spacebar and let go of my click, I can rotate the effect, right? So we can maintain that nice effect. And as soon as I let go of my spacebar, then it goes back to the kind of like the clay effect, right? So I can push this further a bit, press the spacebar, push it down, press the spacebar, push it down without letting go of the spacebar, rotate it, reposition this, and try to maintain that nice, volume. There we go. So it is a fantastic tool for doing these type of things. So I would recommend that you try it on. It's very, very easy. Now that we have this ready, we can just go ahead and increase the resolution a bit so that it's a bit smoother. And like I show you with other tools, if I double click in, I can also go with the smooth brush and maybe increase the size and then just smooth things out a little bit, right? So a lot of really handy tools, and sometimes it's just about knowing how to manipulate some of the basics of it, and then figuring out how to create complex shapes just comes with trial and error of intersecting and boolean and pushing very, very simple shapes. Now another cool thing about the warp brush, let me just do something else very quickly. I'm gonna create a cube, and let's press the spacebar just to have it in there. So this is something that you can do with the base meshes. I just don't want to mess around with this because I'm happy with the final result. So if you have something like this, you can bring in the warp brush, right? And you can switch to maybe, let's try with the cube brush. And again, I have the gizmo that's pressing letter G. So I'm going to push that like so. I can scale that brush from here as well. I'm going to increase the hardness a bit. And then I'm going to press the spacebar and I'm going to push that up, right? So that creates that nice, sort of, I would say like a chamfer or fillet, like inset inside. So you can create a lot of complex shapes just by using the warp tool as well. So let me delete that one, because the only new thing apart from the details that I added is that I have this new piece inside. And I just thought, it needed something there just to break down the simplicity of this shape a little bit. So it's just a cube that I added, but it's non-destructive as well, so you can just push it up and down. And that's about it. So now let's jump into the grouping and the materials, so that when we export it, we can also work with different texture sets in Painter. So again, very, very simple stuff. I'm going to click on the material here, and you'll see I have a bunch of materials. All I've done is I have grouped the pieces that I think will be useful in Painter as individual texture sets. And that way we can, when we export it, we have like multiple pieces. So I'm going to show you what I did with all of the tools by combining this. So this one, I'm holding shift, by the way. So shift and click. So I have 3 pieces that I sort of like selected, and all I need to do is hold Control and G, and that groups them. So if I go back to my outliner and select it, there we go. Here is the group 10. I want to click on that and call it extras. There we go. So that's pretty much what I've done. So I simplified or cleaned up the scene. So I have I'm gonna go one by one so that I don't miss anything. So I have the base, right? So again, this is still a group and it's non-destructive. If I go into this group, I can still, edit all my stuff, but it is a lot more, better organized, right? So I have that base, right? I have this base on the left-hand side. I have the glass, which are ultimately the orb and this lens. This will be the same texture set, but because the material is going to have translucency, it's a lot easier to manipulate objects that are going to have the same material qualities, if you think about it. So you could group all your stuff based on anything that is going to be metallic, anything that's going to be, fabric, and that sort of thing. All right, so the viewer is just this bit without the extras, because let's enable the extras and let's enable screens as well, these two things. I decided that instead of having another, keyboard stuff here, it will be like a nice extra screen. I don't know, we'll see how we go. And then the details. So the details are all the extra stuff, that basically all the small bits and pieces. And in terms of the material, all you have to do to assign something is select your group. In this case, you go to the materials, and I'm gonna click on new material, and it's just gonna create like random colors and random settings of the material every time you do it, but that's totally fine. I'm gonna click on the three dots here and apply to selection. That's why I had selected them in the first place. And of course, you can click on the edit properties here of the material, and we can give it a slightly different color. Again, this color is just purely as a reference to know which ones are, or which objects are part of the same group or the same material. We're gonna change this quite a bit in the texturing. All right, and the roughness obviously gives you, the specularity of the object. And on a side note, when you work with hard surface objects like this, I would recommend that you try a material that has a low roughness. So this one, for instance, let's go back to this one and edit properties. I will probably want to push the roughness down a bit, because once you have this sort of like reflection, it's going to make it a lot easier to evaluate the surface and make sure that, okay, this is nice bevel, there's no artifacts, all of this looking really, really nice. So I would just suggest when you're at this stage, when you're finalizing your object and your scene, to check everything with a material that doesn't have that much roughness. All right, so now that we have this ready to go, we need to export it so that we can use it in Painter and set it up in a project. So to do that, we're gonna go ahead and click on export, and that brings in kind of like a slightly different UI where we have these export settings. Now you have presets, so if you use, let's say, Blender or Maya or Unreal, anything that you're familiar with and it is part of your pipeline, you can just select it. In my case, what I want to do is select Painter, so that when we export this, we can use it in 3D Painter, which is the software we're going to be using for adding all the textures. So that's it. This is the Painter. You can click apply, and it's just going to set up all the output. Now, I just want to change a couple of things. I personally like to use FBX in this case, so I'm going to click on FBX. It's just like a simpler format, because I'm not going to have any color or anything like that. So just changing the format to FBX. The scale, we're going to keep it as it is. The up axis is set to Y. The export content, I'm going to select all layers. Now, if you have other pieces that you experimented with and maybe you don't want them to be part of your scene, you can either delete them or hide them. And when you're exporting them, you can select only the sections or the pieces that you want to export, and that's what the selection is all about. But in my case, everything that I created is going to be visible. Like I don't have any hidden stuff or anything that I want to delete, so all layers is fine. Now the topology is the tricky one. It's not really tricky, but it's like what you need to consider when you're going to push it into Substance Painter. So we're going to export two types of objects. One that is the raw mesh, so basically what you see here, and then a low-res version that is going to be easier for Painter to handle. So we're going to start with the raw mesh, the high resolution, if you will. I'm going to click on the polygon type and set it to raw mesh. And you see that the raw mesh removes some of the options, because it's going to be literally what you see in here. So it's going to be a pretty dense, object, so pretty high resolution. But again, depending on the specs of your computer, this might take a while or not. I'm just going to scroll to show you that I don't have anything else enabled or disabled. These are just like the default settings anyway. And let's click on export, and I'm just going to call it high, as in high resolution. And there we go. That's actually pretty quick. So that's it. This is the raw mesh. Now, the next one, or the next object that we need to export, is the one that we're actually going to be working on, and it has to be a little bit low res, right? So let's switch from raw to quads or triangles. It doesn't really matter. Again, this is just like a concept. So you can just choose either triangles or quads. And then the adaptive topology, I would recommend that leave it as default. If anything, just set it to 50, just so that it's 50-50. This basically means that the topology, when the software exports and recreates the topology, is going to assign smaller polygons to smaller areas, if that makes sense. So let me just give you a better example of that. So for instance, in this object right here, that you have like this very flat area, then you might have like a larger polygon. And when you go, or when the software analyzes and recreates the topology closer to these areas that you might need more polygons to describe this region, then it's going to adapt that topology to add, smaller pieces. Anyway, that's a little bit technical, so let's just ignore that. All I'm going to say is leave it at 50%. That's a good compromise between, the adaptability of that topology. All right, I'm going to leave this global adaptivity unchecked. And the polygon target count, this is essentially what's the resolution, the ultimate resolution you're going to have in your object. So I'm going to crank this up a little bit. So let's go for 600,000, right? Again, depending on what you're trying to achieve, you can play around with this value. Ultimately, this is a concept, so I think this is a fairly decent amount. You can even increase it a bit more. And make sure that you tick off the generate UVs. So this is an important process for the next stage, but I personally prefer to generate the UVs automatically from Painter rather than from Modeler, just because it's a little bit faster and I can just do it multiple times. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep it simple, make sure that generative UVs is off, and I'm gonna click export for the low res, and I'm gonna call it low and export that. There we go. So it's doing it pretty fast. This is real time, by the way. So as this is exporting, it's actually recomputing or recalculating the geometry and producing nicer geometry, or like quads. Well, in this case, I selected triangles, but if you select quads, it will do the same thing. So a pretty fast process as well for the complexity of these objects. And that's about it. So we can just go ahead and jump into Painter. Here we go. This is Painter, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the low, so the triangulated version that we exported, and I'm gonna drag it into Painter. Now, when I drag the low res mesh into Painter, because we don't have any UVs, by default, this will be enabled. If it's not, make sure that you tick that box so that we can auto unwrap it. So this is what I avoided doing during this stage. So that's why I turned off the generate UVs, because I want to do the generation of the UVs at the time of import. That's just a personal preference. If you want to do it from the export, you can totally do so. But because I didn't, I'm going to make sure that this is on. The rest is going to be exactly the same, all the default options, nothing weird, and I'm going to click on OK. All right, so here we go. This is the result. It's not too bad. I think there are some areas that can be improved, but because we have a lot of like these rounded edges, perhaps it's better to export it as a quads. But I just wanted to show you the full process, and everything is looking really nice. There are some areas, like I said, that might need some extra work, like here, and those artifacts, those are easy fixes once we do the baking. So I might actually go ahead and export these as quads. So I'm gonna click on triangle, go to quads. The resolution is pretty much the same. I'm gonna click export, and I'm gonna call it low 2 or low quads maybe. And let's go ahead and wait until this exports as quads, and we can continue from there. All right, so let's go back to Painter. What I'm gonna do is create a new file, and I'm gonna select the new one, and I'm just gonna name it low as well. So I'm gonna bring this in. Again, this one we just exported from Modeler, so I'm gonna click on auto wrap to make sure that I get some UVs, and click OK. And I'm discarding this one. All right, so all we have to do is wait until it gets unwrapped. All right, so here we go. So you see, with quads, it's actually a lot cleaner and a lot nicer, I think. So this is perfect, right? And now let's go ahead and set up the baking, and with that we will be able to start the texturing process in the next video. So to do the baking, that's basically to generate the mesh maps. All we have to do is go to the texture set, and I'm going to click on bake mesh maps. All right, and now that we are here in this baking window, you'll see that I have the same groups that I created in Modeler, and the idea is that each one of these groups is going to be a separate element or a separate object, so I can turn them on and off in here. All right, so to bake the maps that we're going to use for texturing, I'm going to go ahead and click on this icon right here to load the high definition mesh. So I'm going to click on the one that I exported as the raw mesh, and I just called it high FBX, and you'll see it's going to match basically what we have in here. yeah, pretty much the same thing. You'll see that there's also a kind of like a difference between the one that I just imported and the blue one, let's say, and that is just called the cage. Again, without getting too technical, what we can do is use the max frontal distance to reduce this, so that is a little bit more accurate. As long as we don't have any red objects, maybe let me just show you that. There we go. So something like this is not gonna work as well. Anything that is red is not gonna be baked properly. So you can play around with this, and as long as you don't see any red marks or any red bits, we are in a good place. Perfect. All right, so now that we have this ready, all I'm gonna do is click on bake this selected mesh. Now, depending on your computer and your graphics card, you might want to change this. I'm baking at 4K, and I have an RTX 4090, which, you know, it speeds up the process quite a bit and makes things a lot faster. I could actually do it in 8K, but 8K is a little bit of an overkill, regardless of the specs of your computer. So 4K is pretty good, but if you're having issues with it, just reduce the output size. So let's go ahead and click on bake selected textures, and there we go. Now, another really cool thing about this this powerful graphics card is that as it does the baking, I can actually, you know, rotate and move things around and see how the maps are, you know, are being generated. So it's going to start with the base mesh, or the base left, sorry, so this section right here, and then it's going to move to the next one, and for each one of these texture sets is going to create all of these mesh maps that I have in here. All right, so I'm going to pause the video here and come back when it's finished. All right, so the process of baking finished. Let's go ahead and click on return to painter mode or painting mode. And there we go. So we have all the maps. In the texture set list, if I click on that, you'll have the different groups. So with the base left selected, you can click on this icon to focus mode, or you can also press the Alt Q. That's the shortcut in your keyboard. You'll see that we have these really nice maps. All of this darkness that you see in these areas, that is just the ambient occlusion, but we want that because that way we can, you know, add a little bit of whatever it is, you know, dust or rust or whatever in these areas. So that is pretty handy. So we are ready to move on into the next stage, which is the texturing process, and that would allow us to not only take this concept and this prop to the next level, but also add more details with the normals and the height map. So I'll see you in the next video.